Okay, so in this class, we are now going to learn about different types of music. Now, we've already learned about sound, non-musical sounds, musical sounds, and about lay, swar, tal, and we have learned about different rags and the basic thought systems and different melodies of the rags that exists in today's times. Now we come to what exactly is music categorized into? What are the different types of music that exists in this world? So now we have 6 categories which exist in this world. First is the primitive music, then comes first is the primitive music, then comes folk music. After folk music, we have art music. Then we have devotional music, popular music, and confluence music. So we are going to learn about what exactly these words mean. How is primitive music different from folk music? How it is different from popular music? How it is different from art music and confluence music and devotional music? So we'll need to know what exactly these words mean. So first we'll talk about primitive music. Now, primitive music is a very, very fundamental type of music. Now, music categories are those fundamental classes in which the totality of the musical material available in society can be naturally organized. The categorization leads to corresponding categories of different kinds of experiences of music. To gain an insight into musical categorization, it is to become cautious in claiming universal validity for musical theories or judgments. So whatever music exists in this world can naturally come into some categories. And those are exactly the categories that we are discussing now. In spite of inevitable and inbuilt overlaps, these categories denote distinguishable and valuable experiential contents. The categories pose differing questions and necessitate the construction of conceptual frameworks of varying philosophical import. If musical reality is to be construed in its entirety, all musical categories need to be identified and examined. The 4 categories sought to be identified against this background are primitive or tribal music, is the first category. Then folk music is another very important category. Art or classical music is the third category. And popular music is the fourth category. These 4 categories do not need any kind of, these are clear-cut 4 categories that we can see. Now, these 4 categories do not and need not exist in all societies concurrently and in equal proportions. Okay, some societies do have, some societies do not have these. However, the presence or absence constitutes in itself a fact of cultural dynamics demanding an interpretation. In general, the more the number of existing musical categories, the more the degree of socio-cultural complexity in the society under consideration. Now, what are the criteria according to which these categories are differentiated? No identical criteria can be employed because the four terms and the corresponding concepts display inherently differing orientations. For example, the terms tribal and primitive are traceable to ethnological biases, while the term folk owes its origin directly to folklore. The two terms art and classical, which are interchangeably used in India, are clearly products of an aestheticizing impulse, while popular is a term linked to cybernetic processes and operations of the mass media. However, irrespective of terminological sources, it is clear that in the present context, the major thrust could only be the experiential content of associated musics. Now, what exactly is primitive music? Let us see. The adjectival terms primitive and tribal are often used as near synonyms in musical perspective studies. Though both the terms represent attempts to categorize a particular kind of cultural manifestation, the term primitive appears to be more accommodative in etymology as well as in usage. Besides, the term also carries more qualitative connotation. On the other hand, tribal suggests a narrower range of music, also a more direct linkage with anthropology. In its root meaning, primitive suggests the most ancient phase, while the tribal signifies that which pertains to a group of clans under a recognized chief and usually claiming common ancestry. Indian terms used as corresponding to primitive and tribal are Adivasi, Vanya, Aranya, Girijan, or Adim. While the first and the last terms draw attention to the aspect of antiquity, the rest refer to habitat. In the present context, primitive and tribal allude to a type of musical expression genetically related to a particular body or group. Now, primitive music is very basic in nature. Primitive music, like also is called tribal music, basically comes from, it is a very raw kind of music without any sophistication and in its very, very natural form. We'll listen to a few recordings of primitive music and tribal music. The tribes, as we all know, they stay in secluded places, in forests, in jungles, where it is not, of course, the urban kind of city life is not there, and it is the needs of people living in those areas is very minimal. So the music that is created by the tribals is also based on very minimal instruments or minimal and raw sounds. Just like they eat food in a very raw form, they dress very, very basically, and their needs are also very basic. The music that they produce for their own entertainment and for their happiness is also very basic and in a raw form. There are a few instruments that are used in tribal music or primitive music, which are found in a natural form in jungles. All the instruments that we see in today's life, even in the urban life, even for the classical music, all are made from natural materials. We see the tabla, the harmonium, the tanpura, the sitar, flute, everything is made from wood or animal skin or animal bones. So it is something that you find naturally. It is something that is not created by humans, but you find in nature. And that is how they can produce sound which is natural. So it is, all these instruments are made out of wood, but they have to be seasoned, they have to be taken care, they have to be planted. The trees have to be planted, then the wood is sought, then it is seasoned, and there is a lot of process that a particular wood or animal skin goes through before they are used for making instruments. But in tribal music, in primitive music, these um, woods and animal skin is used in a very raw form. It is not seasoned much because they use it and they make the instruments in jungles and in the secluded areas. Their aim is to produce music out of those instruments for their own happiness, for their own entertainment, and not to produce sound and music to present it in front of hundreds and thousands of people and to earn any revenue out of it. The aim is different. That is why the instruments are in a very raw form. Let us now listen to an example of primitive or tribal music. We'll listen to two short clips of this music. Okay. So this was there is more of this recording which we can listen to, but I just wanted you to um, uh, take a hear a glimpse of what exactly is primitive music or tribal music. You would have seen, you would have heard that there are different natural sounds. Like there was sound of two stones that were hitting on each other, or some kind of metal sound that was being hit. Then there was a wind sound in the towards the end, and there were also beats in the beginning. So all these are sounds in a very very crude form, in a very raw form. These are not, but they we can call them as nad and not just any dhwani, as we learned in the beginning. It is not a sound which is not pleasing to your ears. It is pleasing. It is definitely, when it is, what we listen to as music is very sophisticated sound. It passes through microphone and then comes out through speakers, and then it passes through very high-end microphones sometimes, and then it is edited, and then they're added different um, they're made more beautiful with a lot of enhancers, and then it comes out, and then you listen to it as a very sophisticated sound. But these are sounds in a very very crude form. So these are sounds are different, and that is what is exactly primitive music and tribal music all about. So the primitive music is basically, it is not derived from anything. It is very primary. It exists in nature. Humans do not make it, and that is why it is called as primitive music, and it is also assumed as a basis for something. So when we talk about sound in today's times, if we talk about music as a sound, we have to go back to the natural sounds from which music is made, and that is, so this becomes a basis of any kind of music. So primitive also means that it relates to the earliest age or period. It is closely approximating an early ancestral type. So it belongs to the characteristic of an early stage of development of music. That is why it is called as primitive. It is also contributing the assumed parent speech of related language. So when we talk about music as a language in today's times, primitive music is the basis where actually music started. Music, of course, did not start the way, the kind of music that we listen to now is not the music that was there thousands of years back. It has gone through a lot of development. It has also improvised. It has also evolved. Like human beings have evolved, music has also evolved. But music, when it was in the nascent stage, when it was first humans discovered about different objects which can be used to create some kind of sound, and then music was thousands of years back, and that is the time about which we're talking right now when we're talking about primitive music. So what are the characteristics of primitive music? How is it different? How do we identify that a particular music is primitive and a particular music is not primitive. So primitive music and dance are so closely connected with the day, night, and seasonal cycles of the concerned people that they can hardly be separated as music and dance. Because earlier, when humans used to live in jungle, um, humans have always been uh, they've been living collectively, and earlier when they used to search for their own food and build their own houses and live in the jungles, there was also used to be a time when they used to entertain themselves, and after a day's hard work, something to look out for, something to have as an entertainment for themselves, and to celebrate something and to create something, like because they were living in jungles. Summers, they used to experience summers after which there is to be rain, to celebrate even seasonal changes, that when the rains were going to come, it used to feel nice because it used to get cooler, then there is to be winter. So all these seasons also used to be celebrated by them. And what did they do for the celebrations is they used to make sounds, sing in their own way, and use these instruments to express their happiness. They used to dance also, not like sit and sing, but they used to dance, make body movements, and sing along with it. Music is for everyone, everything, and for almost every occasion. All critical phases in the human life cycle find their expression in music. Almost everything causes music. To that extent, music enjoys a high degree of cohesive relationship with the process of living. As a formulation, song is more important than music in the primitive way of life. It is symptomatic that a majority of primitive societies have a word to denote a song, but many lack a word to indicate music. However, song as understood in primitive parlance is a very different entity. Every manifestation of an undifferentiated performing impulse becomes a primitive song. On the other hand, non-primitive usage allows music a wider application than song. Now, primitive music is highly ritualistic. It is ritualistic even when it is not a part of any ritual. In other words, one senses a pervasive ritualistic charge in every performance. The type of rituality suggested is detected through an atmosphere of intense preoccupation of the participants with every detail. A certain elevated psychological stance among the performers and an air of inner compulsion communicated by them. Alert attention is paid to psychological aspects seemingly unconnected with the act of performance. It is therefore next to impossible to arrange for the performance of primitive music without or outside the framework defined by the general rituality described earlier. Audience, as it is normally understood, has a very unusual role to play in performances of primitive music. Audience is, it is not meant for any particular audience. It is for the people who perform that music. Almost everybody participates, though in varying degrees. At the same time, it is also true that performers seem to direct the music to some entity external to them. Music does not take place for its own sake or for viewers or listeners, and yet it has to reach out in order to complete itself. On the whole, the primitive in music relies more on rhythm than on melody. Like we just heard a sample, it starts with a lot of rhythm. Primitive rhythms become manifest through instruments, movements, percussive speech, or a similar mode of vocalizing. Rhythm controls primitive music to such an extent that instruments conventionally employed for melodic purposes are also presented into rhythmic service. In addition to its overall preponderance, rhythm is primitive music also possess definite structured and substantive qualities that need to be discussed separately. So melody in primitive music is primarily characterized by a marked indifference to the quality commonly prescribed as sweetness. So much of the non-primitive and the non-folk music is avowedly made sweet or melodious that the resulting qualities are considered to be musically obligatory. They are considered mistakenly, but they are. It is symptomatic that the performers themselves, while rating performances, seldom apply the criterion of sweetness. They are not sweet to listen to. If you listen to tribal music or primitive music, they are not sweet to listen to. The sound is not sweet, but it is musical because it is not a very sophisticated and a very polished sound. The role of language in literary expression in primitive music needs separate consideration. Language is not regarded as indispensable. Meaningless syllables and sounds appear in abundance. In other words, phonetic patterns rather than linguistic patterns receive more scope in primitive music. Half-formed sentences, proverbs, slogans, or similar formulations and other literary non-entities earn legitimacy in primitive musical compositions. Lack of literary quality is closely linked with the general anonymity prevailing in primitive music. As a matter of routine, the composer remains unnamed in primitive music. More importantly, collective composing is allowed definite scope. Alternatively, it has often been pointed out that even though a particular tune is crystallized or consolidated into actual use by a single person, the tune partakes of many consolidated into actual use by a single person. The tune partakes of many existing ones, and to that extent, it could be said to have been hovering in the air. That the same available corpus of tonal and rhythmic molds is often linked with new phrases and occasions suffices to create a new song. This interpretation of the concept of creation of originality is likely to gain acceptance in other categories of music. So this is a very important aspect of uh, primitive music, that primitive music is very, very nascent, is very unpolished, is very unsophisticated, and the role of language, the role of expression, mainly language through literary expression, does not have much importance. But it is definitely an expression, but through meaningless sounds or meaningless syllables, meaningless syllables, or any kind of sound can be used to express their feelings. We'll listen to one more recording of this. Okay, so this was another sample of primitive music or tribal music. In this, we can hear a lot of wind instruments being used and a lot of tal instruments also used, rhythm instruments, which also have a melody in it, if you have heard it carefully. So these are very basic uh, instruments from which the aim is not to create a song or any kind of songs that we listen to in today's times, but to create the sounds which are pleasing to their ear, because that used to be their only mode of entertainment, only mode of expressing themselves when they are happy or when they're sad, or just to feel good, just to feel happy, or to celebrate, um, just to celebrate, and to also celebrate the changes in seasons, and to express joy over the birth of a child, or to express sadness over death of somebody. So it used to be these musical instruments used to be used, not the instruments I would say, but them instruments in a very basic form uh, used to be used very widely uh, as primitive music or as tribal music. So we've learned in this today's class about primitive music, tribal music, which is one of the very important parts, important types of music that exists, uh, used to exist thousands of years back. In today's times also, there are some tribes. If you find out on Google or on anything, uh, if you just search about tribes that exist in today's times also, there are many tribes that exist in different jungles in all around the world, and they do use these types of instruments or these types of sounds still. uh, these people do not have access to the world that we live in, but they have their means of entertaining themselves. They have their means of uh, being happy, and they create music and they create sound for such occasions. So we have seen about tribal music and primitive music in today's class. In the next class, we will learn about folk music. What exactly is folk music, and how is it different from tribal music and other types of music?